Welcome to stories of the free. This story dates back to 1849 in Center Zone Ross, a black girl with blue eyes who relied on her intelligence to escape the zone free wonder and her belief she had no options left. What came next was concealed for Aries, and one truth long could put her life at risk. This is a difficult and intense tale, so breathe deeply and carefully. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and comment with this tea and country you're listening from. You're informed to ensure these stories are remembered rather than the door. Let's get started. In the early years of August 1832, inside a wood shack behind the coat fields of the Horcroft Plantation, Lower County, Mississippi, a baby girl entered the world, a child who was meant to be killed before she was even ever old. The midwife tended the birth, enslaved woman Amhati who had delivered over Matan children on that plantation, looked at his newborn and felt a chill and saw her dead. The baby was healthy, strong, with tough knuckles and 10 toes, and a cry that echoed through the humid Mississippi. But there was something about the baby that made Hattie's hand shake as she held her blue eyes. Not the cloudy, unsearched that man must have before their true eclat showed itself, these were already clear, already bright, already undeniably blue. Blue like cornflowers, blue like the summer sky over the fields, blue like the eyes of Master Thomas Horcroft, the man who owned the free soul on that plantation and had visited shack many times while his was out. Hattie had been delivering babies for 13 years. She knew what those blue eyes signified. She knew what would happen was the mistress found that. And she knew she had maybe 10 minutes to decide something that would either say that she was left for in her home. The mother was Josephine, 23 years old, purchased by Thomas Horcroft 6 years earlier at a slave auction at Jews. She was what traders called a fancy girl, a term that made Hattie's stomach turn every time she heard it. It meant Josephine was considered beautiful by white standards, her skin lighter than most, meaning she would sell for a higher price because men like Thomas Horcroft would be registered for women's intended use for purposes beyond philoric. Josephine had understood what there was she was bought, and she had endured because the only alternative was death or worse. Now she lay exhausted on a straw mattress, looked at her daughter, instantly grasping what those blue eyes would cost them both. The mistress of the Horcroft Plantation, Elizabeth, was no fool. She knew what her husband did on its claimed be check on his stock or respect the slave quarters. She knew about the child born on that plantation with later skin and features resemble her husband. She had learned to ignore these children, that as though they didn't exist, meant in the British that her marriage was respectable and her husband faithful. But there were limits. Blue eyes crossed that line, there were refusals that couldn't be explained away. Blue eyes would make their plantation owners whisper and ladies at church exchange non-clances. The woman said Elizabeth Horcroft would not tolerate. When news reached the big house that Josephine had given birth, Elizabeth came to see for herself. She woke because the odd in the darkness, her wet cabello in the warm August breeze, her face set on expression had recognized as barely restrained fury. She stepped into the shack without knocking, enslaved people had no right to privacy, and looked down at the baby in Hattie's arms. She saw the blue eyes. She saw her husband stare back from the face of a black child. And she gave the order Hattie had been dead. Elizabeth Horcroft didn't raise her face, she didn't need it. She simply said the child was an abomination, that it should never have been born, and that Hattie should take care of it before morning. Everyone in that room understood what take care of it meant. Hattie was being ordered to kill a newborn. Josephine would watch her daughter die within hours of birth. The proof of Thomas Horcroft's crimes would be buried in a morgue behind the slave quarters, and life on the plantation would continue as if nothing had happened. But Hattie had delivered too many babies to follow that order. She had held too many newborns, felt too many tiny housebreeds against her chest, watched too many children go into this labor in the same fields as their parents. She couldn't kill this child, not even save herself. So she did something that would stay with her for the rest of her life, she lied. She told Elizabeth she would handle the situation and that the mistress should return to the big house and not trouble herself with such unpleasant matters. And when Elizabeth left, satisfied her orders would be carried there, Hattie wrapped the baby in the cleanest rag she could find and carried her into the night. Visselijk samterilat at de the blantash in a krof afok tres zat of door of the botemus bisamers. Het was waar sleft bibol beled verdad, marker kraft was wo de kose zat rote dozen a few years and stones at sanak in tose softer softertime. Nooit bersen verfizerd, het was beneath their notice, a bless for brobertit dispose of other broberty. That made the perfect header spot for a child who was supposed to be dead. For 3 days and 3 nights, baby Ross left the craft those who had come before her. At the end of the room took turn sneak that feed her, user rack salt and cos milk because Josephine coded camoza treasures bush. The covered the baby's mass was she cried, terrified someone would hear and uncover their disabish. The bread offer her, asking codable tick vist she do had an around except people was their own killers. On the 4th night, when Ace left Trader Bast row on his at Vicksburg, they found a weight maker loss of the Horcroft Bantash for offer. The trader's name was Samuel Mix, exactly the kind of man most left people feel. He bought and sodium Bainers Lake Livestock, calculator braces best on edge, health, and productivity. But Mix also had a reputation for take of babies, for local the other way on the board that matches merchandise, for facilitated transactions Bantash owners preferred to keep beneficial. At he had sat 4 years, heider insurance from salary than vegetables to rafflers. She gave Mick the freezer she had, nearly $12, in exchange for taking the baby and sell her a Bantash for an info that no one would ever connect her to the Horcrux. Rose was sold 3 times before her first birthday. She passed Rosie hands of traders in Vicksburg, the Natchez, then Finney in New Orleans, where she was purchased as a boat of a lot by a man named Williamson. Thornton a coat Blantash called McNally of Madison County, Mississippi, about a sound miles north of where Ross was born. I bought the nugget not because I wanted her specifically, but because she combined with a group of other slave people who was required to expand his force. The bill of listed her simply as female enough, بapproximately 4 months, code Harris, no question marks. Her blue eyes weren't mentioned. Her origins are unknown. Her connection to the whole crew Blantash had been erased. Ross spent her late childhood in the slave quarters of McNally Grove, as an older woman named Bessie, who had lost her own children 12 years ago. Bessie was the one who covered the name Ross, from the Bible story of the woman who said, "Where you go, I will go." It was a name of loyalty and devotion, and Bessie hoped it would learn the she'd like in a world where slave people need all the luck they could find. She noticed early that Ross was different from other children. The girl was quiet, watchful, absorbed the fleece with those strange blue eyes that made some people uncomfortable and others suspicious. She rarely cried, rarely complained, childbirth. Bessie Tim Ross was 5, Bessie realized that child's made worked and was she'd never seen before. Ross could remember conversations word for word, if those from weeks earlier. She could count that beer taught, add and subtract numbers most slave children ever learned handle. She could predict when the overseer would make his round, somehow grasp of battles in his behavior better than that so had left on the Blantash for decades. And most remarkably, she had taught herself straight. No one knew how this had happened. Slave people were forbidden from round trade under Mississippi law. The punishment for teaching a slave trade was fear, and the punishment for a slave trade was force, open, brand, mutilation, death. These were the consequences of anyone who dared give slave people access to the right world. Yet somehow, at 5, Ross could look at innocent birds blown across the yard and understand the rules printed on them. She could read signs posted around the Blantash, labels on boxes, names carved into toys. She had deciphered the mystery of language entirely on her own, through observation and better recognition, with a mind that refused to accept limits. Bessie understood immediately that this ability was both a gift and a disadvantage. If the wrong people discovered Ross could read, the child would be destroyed, not just punished, but destroyed, made example of. Slaveholders couldn't afford to let their slave people see that one of their own had acquired knowledge without permission. It would challenge the freeze of the belief about the inferiority of black people. It would suggest that slave people were capable of learning, then recover, become a sense of more than property. So bese tot Ross the most important less of her in life, she tot her head. Ross learned to pretend she was ordinary, look confused when with people taught but no she understood perfectly, the stumble over simple tasks she could have done was easy. She learned to make herself unfeasible, unremarkable, forgettable. This was the strategy that would keep her alive. This was the mask she would wear for years. And she wore it so well that when she was set off and brought to work in the big house of Magnolia Grove, no one suspected that the critical cane of floors and empty chamber boats was smarter than anyone in the building. The mistress of Magnolia Grove, Caroline Soren, was a new way to Ross had ever encountered. Caroline was 43 when Ross came to work in the big house. She had been married to William Soren for 22 years and had 5 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. She managed the domestic operations of the plantation with efficiency and precision, keeping dated records of a expenditure and transactional household. She was educated, half attended a female academy just before her marriage, and she read voraciously, order books from publishers in Philadelphia and New York that took months to read. Caroline noticed Ross almost immediately. There was something about her that most Rose's, her raised conversations, as she positioned herself to offer her discussions that should concern her. Caroline began watching Ross as Ross was everyone else. And what she discovered fascinated her. The girl was listening, not just hearing, but actively listening, process, understand. When Caroline discussed how the cancer was her husband, Ross' eyes would flicker toward the numbers on the body. When Caroline read letters aloud, Ross' lips would move almost imperceptibly, following the words. When Caroline left books open on tables, Ross would lean nearby, her fixed on the text. Caroline decided to test her suspicions. She left a note on her dresser table, a simple message reader, if you can read this, this is blue face. Then she had unwatched. Ross intended to click laundry as she did every morning. She saw the note, read it, and after a moment of hesitation, this is blue face. The decipher changed the phrase. Caroline should have reported Ross to her husband. She should have had the carbon she could the law, made example of her, show reference left person the banta should have done the equate forbid knowledge. That was what society expected. That was what the system demanded. But Caroline Soren was not entirely a creature for society. She was curious, intelligent, and profoundly bored by the never left plantation mistresses or expected lead. She began meeting Ross in secret. She tested the girl's abilities systematically, presented her with increasingly difficult texts and mathematical problems. She discovered that Ross could not only read but also comprehend complex or geometry, analyze information, and draw conclusions from facts. The girl's mind was extraordinary, perhaps the genius level by any standard. Caroline had never encountered anyone, white or black, male or female, with such intellectual capacity. And she began to wonder what would happen if she cultivated that capacity instead of destroying it. The partnership that developed between Caroline Soren and Ross was unprecedented and dangerous. On the surface, nothing changed. Ross continued working as a herself, performed the same menial tasks. But in brief, Caroline began educating her systematically. She taught Ross advanced mathematics, including the counter-method she used to manage the plantation's finances. She gave Ross access to books on history, geography, science, philosophy. She trained Ross to analyze documents, detect inconsistencies, and identify patterns as myths. Within 2 years, Ross understood the Soren plantation's operations better than William Soren himself. Caroline began using Ross' abilities for her own purposes. She had long suspected the overseer was stealing from the plantation, from the boasts from $1,000 for Phoenix expense reports. But she had never been able to prove it because she lacked the time and expertise to audit years of records. Ross accomplished in 3 weeks what Caroline couldn't have done in 3 years. She cross-referenced sales receipts with Shubha manifests, identified discrepancies between reported and actual predictions, and traced them to offenders who did this. She documented the freezer and a report Caroline presented to William, and the overseer was dismissed within a month. This success convinced Caroline that Ross was too fallible to withstand domestic labor. She began the blue growth as a secret weapon this on the business affairs. When William received correspondence from code factors in New Orleans, Ross would read the letters and identify potential distributions. When neighbors proposed business partnerships, Ross would analyze the terms and assess whether the deals were truly beneficial. When disputes arose over property lines or water rates, Ross would research legal precedents and suggest strategies for resolution. All of this was done feasibly. No one said they had know that the Sorrent's improved business income was actually the work of a teenage slave girl. The arrangement continued for nearly a decade. Ross grew from a child into a young woman, and her abilities grew with her. By the time she was 17, in the spring of 1849, she had become indispensable to the operation of McNorrie Grove. She managed the household accounts. She drafted correspondence that Caroline sent. She maintained files on every business associate, every neighbor, every person who might affect the Sorrent's interests. She knew secrets that could destroy families. She understood financial arrangements that if the parties enforced did fully grasp. She had transformed herself from property into something far more valuable, but she was still property. And that contradiction was about to catch up with her. Caroline Sorrent fell in March of 1849. The doctors called it a cancer of the womb, a diagnosis was an inevitable prognosis. There were treatments available, painful procedures and full of caustic chemicals and heated instruments, but everyone understood this merely delayed then. Caroline bore her illness was the so-decanted Blanche mistresses were expected to show. She continued managing her household until she could no longer rise from bed. She continued directing Ross work until she could no longer speak clearly. And she died on May 15, 1849, leaving behind a grief husband, 3 dead children, and a 17 شرطة للشرطة with the slave girl who had been her secret partner for 10 years. William Sorrent was 58 when his wife died. He was a practical man, no gift excessive much, but Caroline affected him more deeply than he had anticipated. They hadn't married for love, their union had been arranged between families, a merger of land and resources. But over 22 years, something resembled life had developed. He had relied on her judgment, trusted her management, never realized how much of the plantation's success was due to rather than him. In the week following Caroline's death, William began settling her affairs. He reviewed her correspondence, financial records, personal papers. He wanted to understand her world, the domestic realm he had largely ignored during their marriage. And in the process, he discovered something that changed the reason he thought he knew about his wife. He found the fields on Ross. Caroline had kept meticulous records of Ross' education, accomplishments, and contributions to the plantation's business operations. She had documented the freeze, perhaps intended to eventually share this with William, perhaps some being able to resist her habit of thorough record keeping. The files contained Ross' analysis of business deals, her audit of financial records, her strategic recommendations. There are feed that for nearly a decade, the most important decisions at McNorrie Grove had been influenced by the insist of the slave carefully forbid from reader. William's reaction was not what Carly might have hoped. He did not admire Ross' abilities. He did not appreciate her contributions. He felt betrayed, humiliated, afraid. His wife had been deceived him, relying on a slave for intellectual kids while he believed himself the master of his own domain. His business partners had been negotiating not with him but with a black header behind his authority. The freezer he had accomplished was tinted by this flesh. And there was another fear, deeper and more primal, Ross not too much. She had seen the Sorrent as a financial records, correspondence, brief negotiations. She knew about that William had concealed from creditors, deal structured deferred taxes, arrangements with neighbor planters that would cause scandal for Phil. She knew secrets that could destroy the Sorrent family's reputation and fortune. Slave birth with this knowledge was not lasted, she was a threat, a liability, a danger to be eliminated. But William couldn't simply kill her. Too many people knew she existed. The household staff had seen her working closely with Carly. The other slave people knew she held a special position. If Ross suddenly disappeared, there would be questions, investigations, consequences will imperfect the foil. He needed a solution that would remove her permanently without rather suspicion. He needed her today in a way that would natural, expected, and remarkable. He needed send her somewhere people did it return from. He found his answer Louisiana. The sugar plantations of Louisiana were notorious so the South. Cot was brutal, but sugar was death. The labor required to cultivate and process sugar cane was so intense, so physically desisted that enslaved people and their had offered left the vacancy of 5 years from a reef. The work began before dawn and continued past midnight or the crane seas. The heat from the boiler has could reach temperatures caused permanent land damage. The machine that processed the cane mamdan killed was terrific kilati. Plantation owners calculated it was cheaper to work the death and pay replacements than treat them humanly. هالسي 17 شرطة لير شرطة وذكر سنة لويزيان شكر بانتاش ودتسر في فلوم. She would be worked past exhaustion, exploded diseases reef غنزيهم تيم, فاد برلي نست سستنيف. Within a year, probably less, she would die. No one would cost a shit, no one would investigate. It would simply be the expected outcome of the system operator as designed. William became active arrangements. He contacted a self-broker Natchez who specialized more for young property to instead. He negotiated a price, except for less than Ross Weathers because his call was disposed rather than proof. He scheduled the sale for September 15 1849. L'ultimate managed the transaction discreetly, and told no one, because secrecy was essential. But William made a critical mistake, he underestimated Ross. She knew something was wrong from the moment William discovered the fields. She had watched him carefully in the weeks after Caroline's death, read his expressions, analyzed his behavior, tried to understand what he would do with the knowledge he had gained. She saw the fear in his eyes when he looked at her. She saw the calculation, the criticism of a man said had to dispose of a problem. She recognized the signs because Caroline had taught her to recognize them in business negotiations. William was blasphemous, and whatever it would not be good for Rose. She needed information, to know exactly what he intended so she could develop a counter strategy, and she had the skills to get it because Caroline had trained her well. Rose began reconnaissance at August, 3 weeks before the scheduled sale. She had access to William's study because she still cleaned it, a duty no one had sought recent after Caroline's death. She used this access to examine his correspondence, financial records, appointment calendar. She did this carefully, methodically, leave a notice. She photographed nothing, cameras did it exist for people in her position. She copied nothing, read if this could be discovered. She memorized the phrase, rely on the extraordinary memory that had served her throughout her life. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. William had learned to sell her a booker named James Batters, operator at Natchez, also specialized in big South Louisiana sugar plantations. The transaction was scheduled for September 15. Batters would arrive at McNally Cove that morning, select the merchandise, complete the paperwork, and transport Lost Louisiana before sunset. By the end of the month, she would be working in the sugar fields. By the end of the year, she would likely be dead. Rose had 17 days to save her own life. The first thing she did was assess her resources. She had no money. She had no allies in the population. She had no legal rights of any kind. She couldn't build authorities because the law considered her property, not heirs. She couldn't simply run, fugitive slave catchers operated throughout the region, and skipped self was worth money to anyone who captured her. She couldn't fight, physical resistance would result in immediate punishment and would change her legal status. Every consumption of of escape was closed to her. But Ruth had something most enslaved people did, information. She had 17 years accumulated knowledge about the authorities, their neighbors, their business partners, their enemies. She knew secrets about manual to keep head. She understood relationships and rivalries that could be exploited. She saw connections as missed. And she was willing to use all of this knowledge to survive. The plan she developed over the following days was extraordinarily complex. It required manipulating multiple people simultaneously, predict their reactions, steer them to the camps that served her purposes. It required perfect time and absolute secrecy. It required both the success of the head, like a chess player and separate her strategies. And it required less that could result in her definition of throne. The first target was a man named Henry Crawford. Crawford owned a plantation just at McNally Cove. He and Williamson had been rifles for decades, competing for land, labor, and status in Madison County City. Their disputes had sometimes turned bitter, lawsuits over property lines, accusations of theft, but the maintained a sort of civility because of warfare between planters was considered unseemly. They attended the same church, served on the same committees, pretended to be gentlemen if they schemed against each other. Ross knows about Henry Crawford that he desperately wanted kept secret. 3 years earlier, Crawford had entered a business arrangement with a code factor in New Orleans that resulted in significant financial losses. To cover them, he had engaged in fraudulent transactions, forged documents and deceived creditors. Ross knew this because Caroline had discovered the door of her investigations, and Ross had helped unleash the efforts. The information had been fed to, never used because Caroline saw no advantage in exposing Crawford while she was alive. But Ross saw an advantage now. She became based under Crawford anonymous later. She coded mail through conventional channels, enslaved people or permitted use the postal system. Instead, she planned for delivery through a free black man who worked as a tracker, traveler between plantations to Barbados and shore beneath. She bade them with a piece of jewelry she had stolen from Caroline's blowrunners in Surrey, had for precisely this kind of emergency. The tracker delivered the letter to Crawford's plantation and disappeared before anyone could question. The letter was carefully crafted. It didn't threat Crawford directly, didn't demand money or favors. It simply informed him that someone possessed evidence of his fraudulent transactions and suggested that this evidence might become public if certain conditions or not met. The conditions were fake, deliberately so. Ross wanted Crawford freighted an answer. She wanted him looking for enemies, subject to a free one, make a mistake she could exploit. Crawford's reaction was exactly what Ross anticipated. He became paranoid. He became suspicious of his household staff, business partners, neighbors. He suspected someone close to him had betrayed his secrets, and he was determined to discover who. This investigation distracted him from other concerns and created chaos Ross could use. The second target was Williamson himself. Ross knew that William's plan to sell her depended on secrecy. He didn't want neighbors knowing he was disposing of a slave who had been his with person attend. He didn't want anyone asking why a Halcyon womb was being sent to the campus of Louisiana. He needed the transaction to be routine, and remarkable, forgettable. Ross decided to make it remarkable. She began spreading information through the slave community at McNally Grove. She told other servants that Master William was planning to sell her, send her to Louisiana, then share for something she had done. The servants took themselves, as servants always do. They expressed sympathy for Ross, who had been quite unhelpful in the household. They wondered why Master William would send with someone who had served Miss Caroline so faithfully. These conversations reached waiters, as Ross knows they would. Bantash mistresses heard gossip from their maids. Overseers heard rumors from their fairs. Within a week, the bundle sale of Ross had become a subject of discussion throughout Madison County. People were curious about why Williamson was disposed of a valuable stuff at a discount price. People were asking questions William had hoped to avoid. This attention made William uncomfortable. He had wanted the sale unfeasible. Instead, it was becoming a local gossip. He began to worry that someone might investigate, that his reasons might be discovered, that his secrets might be exposed. He became cautious, hesitant, unsure. He postponed some preparations, gave Ross more time to execute her plan. The third target was the most dangerous, Dennis Batters, the slave broker who would transport Ross to Louisiana. Batters was a profession. He had been traveling young being for 20 years, learned evaluate slash be bowls away host traders evaluate the stock. He look for signs of illness, injury, disability, scores indicator benchmark that may suggest a troublesome temperament, evidence of failure him to demand higher braces. He was it easily fooled and was it sentimental. Ross understood she couldn't billet batters directly. He had no secrets she know, no laugher she could play. But she could fact the conditions under which she operated, change the context of the transaction was that made alter its outcome. She discovered batters had a competitor, in their broker, Thomas Reed, operator of fixed work. The two men had been feuded 4 years of territory and claims. They undercut each other's braces, spread rumors about each other's liability, occasionally resorted to sabotage. Very fairly was well known in the self-trader community, though most blantish owners were unaware of its intensity. Ross summoned a second anonymous letter, this time Thomas Reed. She informed him that Janus Batters was planning a significant purchase at McNally Cove on September 15th, including several valuable services, and that Batters had boasted about stealing claims from Reed territory. The letter was designed to provoke Reed into action, create a conflict between the two brokers that would disrupt the planned sale. Reed responded exactly as Ross hoped. He arrived at McNally Cove on September 10th, 5 days before Batters was scheduled. He presented himself to William Sarnt as a reputable broker offer competitive prices and suggested William might want to consider alternatives before committing to any transaction. His rifle confused William, who had expected competition for a sale he tried to keep secret. It raised questions about how Reed had learned of the Bender transaction. It created uncertainty William found deeply unsettling. While William was distracted by Reed's unexpected beers, Ross executed the next phase of her plan. She had been collecting documents for weeks, copies of correspondence, financial records, evidence of the Sorrenden's business dealings over the past decade. She had them locations throughout the plantation where they could be retrieved if needed. Now she began deploying them strategically. The first document went to a lawyer of Fixburg named Samuel Morris. Morris had represented the Sorrentons suffer legal matters over the years, but he had also represented Henry Crawford in the property dispute that nearly went to court. He had access to both families' secrets and was known for his discretion. Ross sent him anonymous package containing evidence of irregularities in the Sorrentons' financial records, irregularities suggesting possible fraud. The package included a note suggesting Morris might want to investigate before his reputation became entangled with scandal. Morris didn't investigate immediately, but he began asking questions, making inquiries, expressing concerns about several transactions they had previously brushed without scrutiny. These questions reached William so far his channels, added his conscience that something was wrong, that forces were moving against him, that his carefully constructed plans were unraveling. This second document went to the county sheriff, Robert Blackwell. Blackwell was declared unusual for law enforcement in Antebellum, Mississippi. He took his duties seriously and had a reputation for enforcing the law, even if planters preferred he look the other way. Ross sent him a evidence of Henry Crawford's fraudulent transactions from 3 years earlier, from the Tazork of a concerned Tazo could send by will claims on bench. Blackwell opened investigation. He began questioning Crawford's business partners, examined records, followed the trail of evidence Ross had provided. Crawford, already paranoid from the anonymous letter, became convinced William Sonnet was behind the investigation. He believed his neighbor was using the legal system to destroy him and became prepared his own counterattack. The conflict between Crawford and Thorne, deliberately inflamed by Ross, threatened consume both men. They accused each other of betrayal, conspiracy, claims neither had actually committed. Their mutual suspicion created chaos throughout Madison County, distracted everyone from the quiet slave car orchestrated offense through the shadows. On September 12th, 3 days before the scheduled sale, the situation exploded. Henry Crawford rode to McNally Cove with 3 men. He demanded see William Thorne, accusing him of orchestrating the investigation against him, then destroy his reputation, later than retroscaffer relations between plantation owners. The confrontation took place on the front lawn of the big house, witnessed by dozens of enslaved workers and several white visitors. William denied a freeze. He had no idea what Crawford was talking about. He hadn't sent any letters, contacted any lawyers, informed any sheriffs. He was as confused by the investigation as Crawford was. But Crawford didn't believe him. The two men were killed, voices raised, hands moved toward weapons. For a moment, it seemed blood would be spilled. At that moment, Ross made her move. She stepped forward from the crowd of watching thieves. She walked toward the two crewmen with a calm deliberation that made everyone stone stare. This left people did insert themselves into disputes between white men. This left people did both shone planters on the fringe of furious. What Ross did was so unprecedented, so unexpected, that both Crawford and Sorna fell in sheer surprise. Ross spoke. For the first time in her life, she spoke to white men as sons rather than property. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had better, if those law said she hadn't. She told them she knew who had sent the letters. She knew who had informed the sheriff. She knew who had orchestrated the chaos consumed both their families, and she was all of share this information, but only on certain conditions. The conditions were simple. Rose wanted her freedom. She wanted legal documentation of her emancipation sent by William Thornton witness by Henry Crawford. She wanted safe passage of Mississippi, guaranteed by both men. And she wanted immediately, before the sunset on September 12 1849. Both men laughed. The idea that the slave birth could make demands was absurd. The idea that plantation owners would grant freedom to a slave who had caused them so much trouble was unthinkable. They said they would simply beat the information of her. They said they would torture her until she refilled the freezer she knew. They would make an example of her remembered for generations. Rose did not flinch. She told them she had prepared for this possibility. She told them documents or had a location throughout the county, documents that would be delivered to newspapers, lawyers, and government officials. She did not translate a specific location by sunset. She told them these documents contained evidence of crimes committed by both men, evidence that would result in prosecution, prison, and financial law. She told them she was not bluffing and invited them to test her if the resolve. There was a long silence. Crawford and Thornton looked at each other, seeing their own fear reflected in their eyes. They had spent years accumulating secrets, building fortunes on foundation of fraud and exploitation. They had believed themselves untouchable, protected by wealth, status, and the color of their skin. Now 17 شرطة ديال شرطة قد سلفت كرو سرطنة تبرنغتو كاشغدا. William Thornton spoke first. He asked Rose what criteria had that she would release the documents if after receiving her freedom. He asked how he could trust someone who had already demonstrated capacity for deception. He asked what would prevent her from destroying him once she was beyond his control. Rose answered honestly. She said she had no interest in revenge. She had no desire to see either man or Isidore Buffesh. She simply wanted life, to be free, to go from McNally Cove and never look back. If they gave her freedom, she would disappear. She would take her secrets with her and never speak if they can. But if they refused, if they tried to harm her, if they sold her to Louisiana as William had planned, then she would ensure they suffered consequences far worse than any she had experienced. The negotiations that followed lasted 3 years. It took place in William Thornton's study, with Rose seated across from the two men who had slaved and terrorized people like her their entire lives. They both could offer terms, argued about guarantees, threatened and cajoled, and ultimately surrendered to the reality that Rose had to offer them. At sunset September 12 1849, Rose وطئ في McNally Cove as a free woman. She carried Bieber's document غير منسبادش, sent by William Thornton witness by Henry Crawford. She carried a small amount of money she had demanded as part of the negotiation. And she carried the knowledge that she had accomplished something the entire system of slavery was designed to prevent. She had freed herself. The road from McNally Cove led south toward Vicksburg, the west across the Mississippi River into Louisiana, then further west into Texas, and eventually into Mexico, where slavery did not exist, and where a black woman was blue eyes might find some reasonable safety. Roth knows this wrote because she had studied maps in Carly Sorrent's library, memorized geography zo she memorized the vliesreis, stored information that made some the proof useful. She had known that she would need the flee for her life. She had simply been curious, and crave for knowledge, unable to resist her, if and serve no immediate purpose. That curiosity made safer. But freedom on paper was not the same as freedom in practice. Ross understood this as she ought away from the plantation that had been her base for 17 years. The documents she carried meant nothing at the slave catchers who roamed the roads of Mississippi, men weren't their left capture black people and trainers into bondage. They didn't examine papers carefully, didn't configure know the benefit of the deal. They seized first and asked questions later, nor that if a free black person could be sold back into slavery if no one came forward to fight for the status. The legal system was designed for slaveholders, that so many black persons that a white protector was a property that had wandered from its owner. Rose hadn't suspected this danger. She had planned her escape route carefully, identifying safe hazards, calculated distances between towns, estimated how far she could travel before exhaustion forced her to stop. She had also prepared contingencies, alternative plans if her primary route became impossible. The means of preparation that had gone to her confrontation with Sorrent and Crawford had also bulldozed a detailed strategy for survival afterward. The first night of freedom was the most dangerous. Roth needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and McNally Crawford before William Sorrent could change his mind, before he could decide that the risk of her documents was worth less than the satisfaction of recapture of her, before he could send men to hunt her down and drag her back to face Benjamin. She walked through the darkness, followed as she had mapped in her mind, Fiederman rose were between mates but her, move was a speed and termination that surprised herself. By dawn, she had covered nearly 15 miles. Her feet were blistered and bleeding, her body ached from crush, but she was alive, and she was free, and a free step took her further from the life she had been forced to endure. She found shelter in a abandoned bar near the town of Cannes, hidden in the hell of which she rested and bent her neck smooth. She sobbed pitifully, waking at a free sudden, terrified someone would discover her hidden bliss. But no one came. The bar remained silent, except for Resser Mace and the citizens of form and misbeaten Zerda. She resumed walking at the sunset, traveling through another night of darkness and uncertainty. This had brought her to the skirts of Vicksburg, a city on bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River. Vicksburg was a hub of commerce and slave trade, one of the busiest ports in the region. Thousands of enslaved people passed through its marks every year, both and sold like livestock, shipped above and then referred to plantations throughout the South. It was a dangerous place for a black woman to travel alone. But it was also a necessary point on Roth's journey to freedom. She had a contact in Vicksburg, a free black man named Solomon Burke, who operated a small barber shop near the waterfront. Solomon was part of an informal network helping escaped slaves navigate the dangerous territory between bondage and liberty. He was connected to the Arkansas Underground Railroad, which operated primarily in the Labor South and the North. He was simply a man who believed freedom was worth fighting for and used his position in the community to assist those who sought it. Roth had learned about Solomon through the slave campaign, the invisible communication to connect black communities across the region. She had memorized his address sincerely, added to the store of information a remarkable mind. Finding Solomon's barber shop required navigate streets filled with white people who might cause to show and black woman was walking alone with its superfish. Ruth adopted a person she had developed over her years of hiding. She hinged her shoulders slightly, kept her raised and calves, moved with the shuffler kit someone broken by years of hard labor. She made herself look harmless, unremarkable, not worth a second glance. This performance had protected her throughout her childhood, and it protected her as she made her way through Vicksburg's crowded streets. Solomon Burke was a large man in his 50s, with gray hair and hands scarred by decades of work with razors and hot water. He received Rose cautiously, examined her papers with the skeptical eye of someone who had seen many forged documents over the years. But the papers were genuine, signed by William Sorrent in his own hand, witnessed by Henry Crawford, dated just 2 days earlier. Solomon had never seen legitimate mansabarish papers for someone so young, someone shown no signs of injuries or illnesses that sometimes prompt donors at freezes who had become unbrostable. He was curious about her story but with enough no task questions she might not want to answer. He offered her shelter in a room behind his barber shop, a small space that had had many travelers before her. He provided food, water, and advice about the journey ahead. He warned her about the dangers she would face, the safe catchers barrel the roads, the sheriff's arrest of free blacks on pretexts and serve them back into safety, the ordinary white people who might report a suspicious traffic of malice or creed. He told her the road to Mexico was long and treacherous, that many who attempted didn't survive, that she should consider whether death on the road might be worse than the life she was fleeing. Rose listened but did to offer. She had not risked free in her freedom on its surrender. She had not spent months plans her escape on it bandit it is the first sign of difficulty. She thanked Solomon for his help and honesty and asked what she needed to not survive the next stage of her journey. Solomon told her about a steamboat captain named Marcus Wheeler, who operated a backboat to Infixerica, New Orleans. Wheeler was an abolitionist, not motivated by moral conviction or religious faith. He was simply a businessman who had discovered that transport of their passengers could be both believed done discreetly. He charged high prices but delivered his cargo safely, asked no questions about origins or destinations. Ross had many former negotiations with Thorne, notably Wheeler's fee was some leftover for the journey. The meet Ross Wheeler took place at midnight on the Vicksburg waterfront. The captain was a wizard man in his 40s. Was the permanent want of someone who spent his list into Sananund. He examined Ross' papers briefly, more interested in her money than her legal status. He quoted a price nearly double what Solomon had estimated, but Ross hadn't said this and had reserves she felt only unnecessary. She bid Wheeler half in advance, the other half promised upon safari for New Orleans. The journey then took 3 days. Ross spent most of that time had an aching bottom to blossom and deck. A camped space modified to conceal passengers who preferred not to be seen. She wasn't alone. Other travelers shared the space, a man named Frederick, who had escaped from a plantation in Tennessee, and a woman named Claire, who had brushed her own freedom after years of service and was now fleeing, a former owner who disputed the validity of her papers. They didn't speak much during the journey. There was little to say, and Silas was safer than conversation that might be offered. New Orleans was an nice Ross had ever experienced. This city was fast and chaotic, a sort of mix of cultures and languages that overwhelmed her senses after the early slash of Madras County. French, Spanish, and English blended in the streets. Free people of color would openly operate businesses on the property, left impossible in Mississippi. Enslaved people moved to Rose's still alongside owners, some almost as well dressed as the whites they served. Others bear marks of brutal treatment Ross recognized from her own experience. This city was a contradiction, a place where slavery coexisted with a significant free black population, where the lines between bondage and liberty were sometimes burdened with Ross found both hopeful and confusing. She didn't like her in New Orleans. This city might be more tolerant than the Mississippi countryside, but it was still dangerous for a young black woman to travel alone. Slave traders operated openly in the markets, and kidnappers talked free blacks who might be sold before anyone noticed their disappearance. Ross used contacts Solomon had provided find passage on a ship held west along the Gulf Coast to Texas and Chevrolet, Mexico. The ship was a coastal trader carrying cotton sugar to markets in Kansas. Its captain was a Yankee from Massachusetts, no particular feelings about their free but wouldn't transport their passengers regardless of color. Ross bid for her passage with the last of her money from the sold negotiation. Calculator she would need find or consider Texas, that her resources would last indefinitely, that survival would require more than just escape. The voyage along the Gulf Coast took 2 weeks. Ross spent the time in research she could about Texas and Mexico, questions sellers and fellow passengers about conditions ahead. She learned that Texas had been an independent republic before joining the United States in 1845. That slavery was legal there and expanded rapidly as culture spread westward, that the Mexican border was porous and poorly guarded. That thousands of escaped slaves had found freedom because into territory where bondage did not exist. She learned the names of towns near the border, the routes the refugees had followed, the dangers awaiting those who attempted to cross them. She also learned about the fugitives conquest was the better workshop. The law, which would eventually pass in 1850, would require citizens through the United States and capture escaped would not use fugitives right trail by jury, would impose fair penalties on anyone adrenawas. The law had at best yet to north made her journey, but the approach cast a shadow over everyone fleeing bondage. If she reached Mexico, she would never be truly safe as long as the United States existed in scrap form. This left a better issue freeware, better laws, bail politicians, ensure no black births could ever feel secure. The ship landed at Calft on October 3 1849. Ross had been traveling for 3 weeks, covered hundreds of miles by foot, steamboat, and sail, passing through territories where she could have been captured and earned free at any moment. She was exhausted and fretted and uncertain about what lay ahead, but she was also alive, free, and closer to permanent safety than ever before. Calft was a nasty barely 2 decades old, but on a very led the Gulf of Mexico. It served as the primary port for the Republic of Texas after this day, and caught another code flown from the interior. This tea had a small free black bobby lash, mostly skilled workers who had rifled from other ports of the sea, and Ross found temporary shelter with a family so Lambert had recommended to his network. She stayed in Calft for 2 weeks, resting and recovered from the physical toll of her journey. During this time, she began to understand that her escape was now complete, that dangers remained she had fully anticipated. Word of her departure from McNally Cove had spread through the networks connected holders across the sea. William Thornton had a sentiment to pursue her, as she had failed. He had in some hours, he had blessed advertisements in Nosaba pursue the ridge, offered a reward for information about Erin was of much of her disturbance, claimed her freedom by or forged, threat of she remained as lawful property despite the documents she carried. The advertisements or lies. Ross Bebbers or Genio, send in their doors, perhaps, but likely fardenzeles. But Ross mattered less than Bersabish, as a Bersabish was that a significant reward awaited anyone who captured the blue-eyed black girl and turned her at Mississippi. Safe captures became local for her. Local authorities became banned shanty black women traffic alone. The British freedom Bebbers should have befried was undermined by Thornton's campaign of disinformation. Ross realized she needed to change her plans. She could travel or beneath the Mexican border. She could rely on established routes the refugees had followed. She needed to disappear, become someone else, shed the identity Sonnet was used to hunt her. She needed to do what she had always done best, become invisible. The transformation began with her appearance. Ross' most distinctive feature was her blue eyes, the characteristic that had marked her for this at birth and made her easy to identify. She could change her color, but she could make it less noticeable. She obtained a pair of spectacles with dark lenses, they can be bold with sensitive sometimes were to protect against the knee. The glasses bestowed her rays enough that casual observers wouldn't notice their unusual color. They also changed her appearance significantly, making her look older and more scholarly, less like the descriptions related and wanted advertisements. She changed her name as well. She became Sarah Jonas, a common name that would attract attention, needn't use no connection to the Ross who had escaped McNally Cove. She brackets speaking with a different accent, dubbed as the battles of free blacks from New Orleans rather than the Mississippi countryside. She modified her posture, her walk, her mannerisms, became someone known free who she could control. The no identity required documentation. Ross could use the freedom Berber Sonnet had sent because they identified her as Ross and would connect her to the wanted advertisements. She needed no Berbers, documents established Sir Jones as a free woman of color with a legitimate history in legal traffic. Obtaining such a document was illegal but not impossible. Forgery was a slave industry in the antebellum South, serve a free one from escaped their seeking freedom to it remain seeking no identities. Ross found a forger in Calft to hold those Berbers that would pass all but the most reckless of the British. Bebbers established Sir Jones as a seamstress from New Orleans traveler to visit relatives in San Antonio. With her no identity established, Ross resumed her journey toward Mexico. She trafficked beste coachronkalst te Joost, then bij wakete from Joost tot San Antonio. The journey was slow and uncomfortable. Kaffer territories was still a frontier, settlements barely more than collections of shacks and salons. But the frontier had advantages for someone lost to choice. People on the frontier asked fewer questions. The regardless about origins and more about whether Abers could work, could contribute, could survive the harsh conditions of the free ones in Verkefferland. She reached San Antonio in early November. This city was a mix of Mexican-American influences, a place where Spanish was spoke as of as English, where the recent war between the United States and Mexico had left linear tensions. The Mexico border led just 50 miles to the south, those territories that was disputed and dangerous but passable for someone determined enough to attempt to cross. Rose could see her destinish. She could almost touch freedom. But she had heard enough by to know that the enemies of any journey were of the most dangerous. She found work in San Antonio as a laundress, one of the few occupations open to black women in the frontier city. The work was hard, the bad war, but it led her to save money for the fin like of her journey will maintain her kafir identity. She lived in a small room behind the laundry, kept herself, so both no one about her to origins or plans. She had become Sir Jones so completely that sometimes she forgot Rose had ever existed. But Rose had not forgot. Rose was still there beneath the surf, watching, and laser, plan. Rose noticed on strangers at costages about no rifles from the east. Rose observed on servants in that bewitching places or black people castle. Rose recognized the scenes of organization, the methodical battle of hunters closer and observer. They found her in the summer. She was working in the laundry when two white men entered and asked for Sir Jones. They were professionals of catchers, men who made their life hunters kept self and returned them to bondage. They had been hired by William Thorne to track those blue-eyed crew who had humiliated them, as they had followed her to across hundreds of miles from Mississippi to Louisiana to Texas. They didn't believe she was Sir Jones. They didn't care about her papers. They had a physical description and a substantial reward, and then it ended click. Rose had prepared for this moment. She had always known that run was only temporary, that eventually she would have to confront the forces pursuing her. She had spent her weeks in San Antonio not just working on self but with a plan, developed strategies for the confrontation she knew was coming. She had identified allies and resources. She had studied Texas legal system, learned how to differ from SBs and what protections might be available to someone her situation. She had positioned herself to fate. This left captures made their first mistake by some of Rose would be easy to capture. They were accustomed to take care of the isolated runaways, people with no resources, no support, or could be seized and transported before anyone knew what was happening. They did not expect organized resistance. They did not anticipate that this particular target had been prepared for them. Rose's response was immediate and coordinated. She had briefly established relationships with several members of San Antonio's soul abolitionist community, with people and free blacks who both the free and were willing to take risks to help those in bondage. When this left captures arrived, Rose Sally son vintage. A lawyer named Thomas Bint built at the laundry with an air, demanded the captures produce legal documentation of their sorted season. A local businessman named William Cooperfield complete with the sheriff alleges the captures or planned to kidnap a free woman. Several witnesses come forward to testify that they had known Sarah Jones for months and could vouch for her status as a free birth. This left captures had not expected to face legal opposition as of state like Texas. They had warrants from Mississippi, but Texas law required additional documentation for capture of alleged fugitives, documentation they did not possess. They had physical description of Rose, but Rose had changed her appearance significantly, and the woman before them did not obviously match the description. They had confidence in their authority, but that confidence was being challenged by lawyers, businessmen, and witnesses determined to disrupt their mission. The confrontation led over 3 days. This left captures attempted to seize Rose directly but were blocked by her allies and warned by the sheriff that unauthorized kidnapping would result in their arrest. They attempted to obtain additional documentation from Texas authorities, but the process was slow and complicated, encountered unusual delays at every stage. They attempted to block local officials but found that key officials had already been influenced by Ross' notorious supporters. Ross used this read strategically. She knows the slave captures would eventually obtain the documentation they needed, that the legal obstacles could only delay them, not stop them permanently. She needed to escape before the bureaucratic barriers crumbled. She needed to reach Mexico, where American wards had no authority and where slave captures could not follow. On the night of December 15 1849, Ross fled San Antonio. She traveled with a kid, a Mexican man named Diego Rabes, who knew the territory between San Antonio and the border and had helped the fugitives make the crossing. The road horses Ross had bridged to their surfers, moved as quickly as the train arrived, resurrecting the slave captures who would surely follow once they realized their quarry had escaped. The journey to the border took 4 days. They traveled through landscapes Ross had never imagined, deserts, scrublands, rocky hills stretched forever under the fastest ski. They followed roads and settlements, following trails only Diego knew, trails used by smugglers, refugees, and others who needed move without being observed. They slept during the day and traveled at night, navigated by stores Diego could read like a map. On December 19 1849, they reached the Rio Grande. The river was low at this time of year, shallow enough to cross many places. On the other side of Mexico, a country that had abolished slavery in 1829, a country where Ross would finally be beyond the reach of American and American slave catchers. She could see the forbidden from where she stood, could see the promised land that had seemed impossibly disadjustments earlier when she had been planned her escape from McNally Grove. But the crossing would not be simple. The slave catchers had followed more quickly than Ross had anticipated. Diego spotted them in the distance, 3 raiders moved fast along the trail and Diego had followed. They would reach the river within an hour, possibly less. If Ross attempted to cross now, she might not make it to the other side before they caught up. The river was wide and the current stronger than to beard. A cross on horseback would take time Ross might not have. Diego made a decision. It would Ross to cross immediately, to push her horse into the water and wait for the Mexican shore without looking back. He would stay behind to delay the pursuers, to give her the time she needed to reach safety. Ross persisted. She didn't want anyone else to suffer on her behalf. She didn't want Diego dead on her hands. But Diego was adamant. He had helped many people escape Mexico, some had, some did. He would not let Ross become one of those who had come so close only to be captured at the final moment. Ross entered the river. The water was cold, colder than she had expected, and the current pulled at her horse's legs with surprising force. She gripped the saddle and urged the horse forward, focusing on the opposite bank, really noticing about what was happening behind her. She heard shouting, heard the sound of horses splash into the river, heard a canary across the water. She did not look back. She kept her eyes fixed on Mexico, on freedom, on the future she had fought so hard to reach. The crosser took approximately 15 minutes. It felt like years. Every second, Ross expected hands grabbed at her, expected to be pulled from her horse and dragged back to American territory. But the hands never came. The slave catchers never caught up. When Ross finally reached the Mexican shore and turned to look back, she saw Diego still in the water, his horse blocked off the path of the pursuers, his body between them and their torque. She never learned what happened to Diego after that. She never learned whether he survived the confrontation or sacrificed his life to ensure her freedom. She searched for information the years that followed, asked everyone she could find who might know. But Diego seemed to have vanished as completely as Ross herself had vanished from the slave states. He became one of the countless unrecorded heroes of the Sri slavery, a person whose courage made someone else's freedom possible and whose name was never to the history books. Ross crossed into Mexico on December 19 1849. She was 17 years old. She had traveled more than 1,000 miles from the plantation where she had been enslaved. She had outwitted some of the most powerful men in the city. She had survived slave catchers, bounty hunters, an a legal system designed to ensure that people like her could never escape. And, standing for the first time in her life, she was finally, truly, perfectly free. The first year of freedom were harder than Ross had imagined. Mexico was not a paradise. The country was poor and politically unstable, recovering from a devastating war with the United States that had cost half its territory. The areas near the border were particularly chaotic, plagued by bands, and the long-term effects of conflict. Ross had no money, no connections, no knowledge of Spanish, no skills easily marketable as unfamiliar environment. She had her intelligence, her determination, and her freedom. For a while, that was all she had. She settled initially in the town of Piedras Negras, just across the river from the Texas town of Iquelbas. The location was confined for newly refugees from American slavery, and a small community of farmers had established themselves there over the years. Ross found work as a domestic servant, a role benefit familiar but at least provided food and shelter, while she learned the language and customs of her new country. She was no longer Ross or Sarah. She chose a new name for her new life, a name with no connection to any that had come before. She became Marie Santos, a woman that a best, a birth exists only in the present tense. The education Caroline Solon had given her both surprisingly valuable Mexico. Ross' ability to read and write in English made her useful to merchants who trade across the border, lawyers who needed documents translated, the fishes who to American authorities. As her Spanish improved, she became even more valuable, able to move between languages and cultures with fluency few others possess. She began working as a translator and secretary, running after her own romance of monuments for the future. She was billed as a no life, one word at a time, one transaction at a time. But freedom did not arrest the best. Ross carried the memories of McNally Croft with her, the humiliations and cruelties she had witnessed and endured, the knowledge of what self-return meant for those trapped within its crib. She thought about the people she had left behind, the enslaved community at McNally Croft, who had no opportunity to escape, to labor in the cold fields while she would find their Mexican case. She thought about Bessie, who had raised her and named her and taught her to hide. She thought about the other children she had grown up with, sold, worked to death, or broke by the system Ross had managed to escape. She also thought about revenge. William Thornton had tried to kill her. He had tried to send her to the sugar plantations of Louisiana, knowing she would die there within a year. He had lied about her freedom papers, had since left captures that had her across half a continent, had an freezer in his birth to recapture her and been shot for the crime itself her own life. He had treated her as property, as a problem to be eliminated, as senseless than the own. And he had never faced any consequences for an defeat. Ross wanted him to face consequences. The desire for revenge was not immediate. In the first years of freedom, survival consumed all her attention and energy. But as her situation stabilized, as she established herself in her new identity and country, the Odanakir became treacherous. She had escaped, but escape was not justice. She had survived, but survival was not victory. Thornton was still comfortable on his plantation, still on an exploiter young beginners, still believing he had the right to destroy anyone who challenged his authority. Ross began covered information. She used her position as a translator to access documents and correspondence across the border, learn about political and economic conditions in the American South. She maintained contact with the network of abolitionists and kept themselves moving between the two countries, collecting intelligence about specific plantations and slaveholders. She learned that William Thornton was still operator McNally Croft, that his finances had suffered somewhat after the chaos she had created during her escape, but he remained one of the wealthier planters in Madison County. She also learned about the growing tensions between North and South over slavery. The compromise of 1850 had temporarily defused the conflict, but in the later shows remained resolved. Abolitionists in the North were becoming more focused and organized. Slaveholders in the South were becoming more defensive and extreme. Everyone who paid attention understood that the current situation could not continue indefinitely, that eventually the contradictions would explode into open conflict. Ross saw opportunity in this instability. She began corresponding with abolitionists in the North using the network of contacts she had developed during her years in Mexico. She shared information about conditions on Caesar plantations, about the methods of holders used to control their property, about the experiences of those who had escaped bondage. Her letters were articulate and detailed, drawing on the Jewish Caroline Sorrent had perfected in the analytical skills she had developed during years of managing the Sorrent's business affairs. She wrote under a sudden, protect her identity will make her official. These letters attracted attention. Abolitionists recognized that the information was perfect was more detailed and sorted than observed to be received from skeptics. Most renewals came from the field and had limited knowledge of their owners' business operations. Ross had seen the inside of the plantation system, had understood how it functioned economically, socially, politically. Her insights were valuable to people trained to dismantle that system. In 1854, Ross received a letter from William Lloyd Garrett, the editor of the Liberator and one of the most prominent abolitionists in America. Garrett had read Ross' correspondence and wanted to know more about her story. He wanted to know whether she would be allowed to share her experiences publicly, to become a face in the crown movement against slavery. He wanted to know whether she would consider coming to the North, where she could speak to audiences who needed to understand what slavery truly meant. Ross considered the offer carefully. Return to the United States would mean return to danger. The Fugitive Slave Act was not in effect, requiring citizens to seize and capture escaped slaves regardless of what they left them. She could be seized and bossed as easily as necessary, dragged back to bondage despite the free so she hadn't escaped. Her Mexican citizenship provided some protection, but that protection was unsure. American slave catchers had been known to operate across borders when rewards were high enough. But Ross also understood the power of testimony. She understood that stories could change minds, shift opinions, but the political pressure necessary to destroy the institution that had nearly destroyed her. She had survived slavery. She had escaped slavery. Now she had the opportunity to fight slavery, to contribute to eventual abolition, to ensure no one else would suffer what she had suffered. She accepted caresses and stash. Ross traveled the boss in the spring of 1855, referring a city Ross anti-slavery sentiment. The publication of Knuckle Tom's Cab 3 years earlier had transformed Northern attitude toward slavery, making the abstract full concrete and personal. Then Nebraska's the previous year had addressed both theses, who had urged furthermore that and skipped slave back to bondage Ross rates Lendos about stairs. This city was ready to hear Ross' story, ready to be moved by her testimony, ready to support the cause she represented. Her first public speech took place in Faneuil Hall on May 15th, 1855. She stood before an audience of more than 1,000 people, looking at with secret to hear what she had to say. She was nervous, more nervous than she had been during any of the dangerous moments of her escape. But she had learned to hide her fear, to present a comic story regardless of what she felt inside. She took a deep breath, opened her mouth, and began to speak. She told them about being born with blue eyes. She told them about the order to kill her, about how his desperate disabish, about running abandoned people who had saved her life at the risk of their own. She told them about Caroline Sorn, the complicated woman who had educated her well on her, who had kept her toes to fate to never question of the system that made the fate necessary. She told them about his father the blood sent her to Louisiana, about the 17 days of plan and non-belash, about what who from acknowledge of as a free woman is the most powerful man Madis can stood her blessed to stop her. The audience was transfixed. They had heard escaped slaves speak before, had listened to accounts of abandons, separations, the daily cruelties of bondage. But they had never heard a story like Ross. They had never encountered a former slave who spoke with such analytical prestige, who described the mechanisms of the system with such devastating clarity, who had defeated her oppressors not through physical resistance but through superior intelligence and plan. Ross' story challenged the freedom they thought they know about enslaved people, proved that the supposed inferiority of black people was a lie told by those who benefited from that lie. This speech was a sensation. Newspapers throughout the North reported on the blue-eyed former slave who had it with her masters. Abolitionists invited Ross to speak instead because the rage, from New York to Philadelphia to Cleveland to Chicago. She became a celebrity of the movement, her story repeated in pamphlets, articles, and sermons. She became proof that the free was not just morally wrong but practically doomed, that the system could not survive enslaved people across existed, people who were clearly equal or superior to those who claimed to own them. But Ruth had no come to the Northern beat to tell her story. She had come for revenge. She had never forgot Williamson. She had never forgive him for trying to kill her, for hunting her across the continent, for treating her as something to be disobeyed rather than someone to be respected. Now she had a platform. Now she had audience. Now she had the ability to strike back at the man who had tried to destroy her. She began including assault to in her speeches. She described his plantation, his business practices, his treatment of slave people. She detailed the fraud she had discovered over her years of managing his affairs, the debts he had concealed, the partners he had cheated. She exposed him publicly, making his name synonymous with the worst excesses of the slave system, ensuring his reputation would be destroyed if he never faced legal consequences. The exposure had consequences. No other businessman had previously dealt with so began distancing themselves. Benefits that had extended him credit became more cautious. Code factors in New Orleans oberst's crop started to offer lower prices, cited concerns about reliability. Ross could teach Solent directly, but she could damage him economically, at the fort she had to own the bodies of enslaved people. Word of Ross beaches reached Madras County. Williamson learned that the Curry had trade center thus was not a firm establishing store of northern cities until audiences but his crimes. He learned that his name was being cursed in churches and meeting halls, that he had become a villain in narrative of the anti-slavery movement. He learned that the secrets Ross carried had not been buried when she escaped but were not being broadcast to thousands of people who would never forget. The knowledge destroyed him. Solent died in 1858, 3 years after Ross began her speaker tour. The official cause was heart failure, but those who knew him understood that he had been broken by public humiliation, by the collapse of his business relationships, by the realization that if he had tried to murder had achieved a revenge more complete than any physical failures could have accomplished. He did know that his name would live in infamy, that he would be remembered not as a gentle implanter but as a monster who had tried to kill a child for half of their own eyes. Ross continued speaking until the civil war made her testimony necessary. The conflict everyone had predicted finally arrived, consuming the nation for years of bloodshed that would kill more than 600 of people. Ross supported the unique cause, speaking that recruitment rallies and fundraiser events celebrate each another victory as a start to the destruction of the system she had escaped. While the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, she would for the first 10 years, overwhelmed by the knowledge that millions of people would experience the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. She returned to Mexico after the war ended, settling in Mexico City, where she lived until her death in 1891 at the age of 59. She never married. She never had children. She devoted her later years to education, established schools for poor children, teaching them trade and they, giving them the same tools that had saved their life. She wrote a memoir published in 1878, a dated account of her escape and her experiences as an abolitionist, a document historians would later cite as one of the most important first-hand accounts of America's slavery. The memoir began with the story of her birth, with that is the subject of her life, with the blues that had marked her for death and ultimately became her signature. It ended with a simple statement capturing a phrase Ross had read of her extraordinary journey. She wrote that she had been born a slave, had lived as a fugitive, had spoken as an activist, and would die as a free woman. She wrote that her race had seen cruelty and courage, hatred and hope, the worst and best that human beings are capable of producing. She wrote that freedom was never given, only taken, and that those who waited for permission to be free would wait forever. And she wrote that she had no regrets. The blue-eyed black girl who should have been killed at birth had left Cecily free destroyed. She had contributed to that destruction with her words, her weakness, and refusal to accept the fate the system had sent her. She had proof that intelligence could defeat power, that determines she could overcome brush, that one birth was as well fate could change the course of history. She had been impossible from the moment she was born. She had remained impossible for 59 years struggle and survive, and then, the impossible had won.